Where does this sit for them in terms of series wins? And how big a statement will it be from this Virat Kohli team?
It'll be big. It'll be very big. I think, there is, we talk about Ashes history, but of course there is England-India history as well, all sorts of it, on and off the field, a political history, a sporting rivalry. Well, Avanish, there are only two things I need to do, and they're the same on both hands.
Only creep in 3-1 just to match you. But
how's the back and how's the hair?
Back's better, hair's getting there, so to speak. I've kind of given myself some sort of Mexican look, which is certainly not something that I kind of envisaged before getting the cut. So
you need to get a big hat then.
Right, so it's the fifth and final test. All roads lead to Old Trafford, not the football, but the cricket ground, of course. And we have David Gower to preview it with us. David, how are you feeling on this Thursday? We're heading into a special weekend of sport in general. But Manchester, Old Trafford, it's not a successful ground for India when you take a look at history. Do you see it the same way?
Well, I think England will be very happy that history might be on their side, because obviously there is still the chance. I mean, the most important issue, let's face it, the single burning issue about this whole situation is my prediction. As we know, over the last few weeks, my predictions have tended to waver onto the wrong side of a fence. But the one that I'm still standing by, the one that still exists, is the prediction that it might be 2-2 at the end of the series. So if that comes true, finally, my sanctity as a judge in this game might be preserved. If it fails, I'll get over it. But that's the thing. I mean, there's a lot to play for. We've talked in previous games about bounce back ability, and that's what happened for England at Leeds. They know they have the capacity, and they know also, I mean, it's one of these interesting psychological tricks, isn't it? Because India will be looking at all the things they've done right. Winning games, to go 2-1 up, that's the thing they've done right. They'll look at the runs that were made at the Oval in difficult circumstances. They'll look at the wickets on that final day that came in the nick of time. They'll say, we got all that right. Whatever they did well at Lord's as well, we got that right. And they'll be harping on that. England will say, right, we bounced back at Leeds. They'll be saying, only if we had taken our catches, for instance, the result at the Oval could have been different. It could be England that was 2-1 up. And so all those things will have been mulled over by both teams. And so it is a bit of a battle of wits. It's a battle for confidence going into this final game. But of course, those little things like the catches, I say little things, those vital things like the catches that went down for England, all those slips catches, all those little things that could have gone right, some of them sharp, some of them apparently quite easy by international standards. If they hold their catches, keep the pressure on, and somehow come out on top, then that will be fantastic for England as the home side to make it 2-2 and avoid a second consecutive home series defeat, which would be not ignominious, but very disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, Australia found themselves in a similar position last summer, or 2 summers ago before that, actually. They were 2-1 up before England came back to make it 2-2. Changes in the offing for sure. Butler should play. Wood could play. And Leach, will he play?
Well, everyone's saying that they're going to wait and see. I mean, okay, we're a day away from, pretty much 24 hours exactly away from the start of play in this fifth and final test match. Joe Root has said that they'll look at conditions. And by the sound of it at the moment, those conditions haven't exactly convinced them to play the second spinner. If they do need 2 spinners, of course, Root always has the option to bowl himself, but that's 2 off spinners when you have Moeen as the lead spinner and Root as the backup. So, I mean, Joe Root, to be fair, and I've seen, obviously, what about that magic spell in Ahmedabad? Admittedly on a wicket that was turning square pretty much from the get-go. But he can bowl if the ball is turning. He's not the worst by any stretch of the imagination. So you have always that chance, if you're England, to balance things out by including Root as the second spinner. If you're not convinced, for instance, that Jack Leach is going to get much work at the right stage of the game. So I haven't heard any noises out of the Indian camp yet as to whether we'll finally see Ashwin in this series. But again, when they look at that pitch first thing tomorrow morning, as we've always said, if there is a hint of moisture, if there's a tinge of green or even a stark shade of green, that will convince people, I'm sure, to play the seam bowlers. Because, of course, it's all very well saying that a pitch might turn later, but you've got to judge, and this is one of those impossible things to be absolutely sure about, you've got to judge whether you'll actually get to later. In other words, if a game is done and dusted, dust is probably the wrong word. If a game is done and seamed, in 3 days, then, if you see what I mean, then you don't need the extra spinner for days 4 and 5. So if all the damage is going to be done in the first couple of days, there you go. But of course, if you get a normal, and this is sort of the usual stuff, you get a normal pitch which might start a little bit helpful for the seamers, dries out, turns flat, then turns. I mean, it's anyone's game, anyone's guessing game as to when that's going to come into play. So, as I say, I've heard nothing from the Indian camp about the extra spinner, possibly. I mean, in many ways, it'd be very nice to see Ashwin before this tour finishes, because he is a great bowler. But of course, if the tactics required by Virat Kohli and his think tank mean that Ashwin sits it out for the fifth and final time, well, so be it.
We'll just come to Ashwin in just due course of time. But having said all of that about England, what about Robinson and Anderson? I mean, they've played a lot of cricket throughout the series, bowled a lot of overs. Will you risk them in a must-win game like this?
Well, again, they've been quite coy, aren't they? Because here we are, 24 hours before the game starting. All I've seen in the last few minutes is words of caution about not playing a player who might be injured during the course of the game, which suggests that they're both fit as we speak. But modern science being what it is, this red zone, they have this thing called the red zone, which the medics, the doctors, the physios will look at as a potential area of danger for someone like Jimmy Anderson, at the age of 39, maybe going down during the game. So if they're judged to be in the red zone, that's a really tricky thing, because in good old-fashioned days, let's face it, good old-fashioned days, and at the end of this game, you get a rest come what may before the next piece of work way down the line, or comparatively way down the line. You would say, right, how do we win this game? We get our best bowler of all time, Jimmy Anderson. We fire him up, we look after him, we hope he takes those wickets as he does in the first innings, which might give you an advantage, and you hope you get something out of him later in the game, which of course, actually, it's interesting, the facts and the figures suggest that second innings has not been his forte through this series. So, again, you balance all these things out. But if I were England, if I were Joe Root and Jimmy says, actually, do you know what, I'm okay, then Jimmy plays. Robinson's had a very good series. And again, if he says, actually, I feel fine, I feel strong, then I would play him too. And maybe bring in Mark Wood, because I think that extra element of pace, because what we saw at the Oval, for instance, was 4 people of much the same sort of pace bowling. Well, if you bring in Wood, then you have that little bit of extra something. But of course, then you've got to jiggle things around elsewhere. But those are the factors they need to consider. I mean, as I say, I would like to see Jimmy play. It's his home ground. For instance, it might, apart from anything else, there is the emotion that it could be his last Test match. I know he wants to go on forever. I know he wants to be timeless, superhuman, but it could be his last Test match at his home ground, and he's very fond of Old Trafford. So, so many reasons to play him, and it'd have to be a very extreme fitness problem if he doesn't play, I'd say.
I think he will play. At the end of the day, Jimmy Anderson stand, and we can't really put it past him, and I think he'd be relishing the opportunities, like you said. Then let's come across India right now, because at the end of the day, they've come on a high entering Manchester. They could win the series 3-1 potentially, make history. 2007 was the last time they won a series. Incidentally, Cristiano Ronaldo also played for Manchester United during that era, so there's something about India and England when Ronaldo is there. But jokes apart, though, what's the composition that Virat will look at? You hinted upon whether Ashwin will play or not. They've said that Manchester, given the evidence that we've seen in the county championship, Ashwin should play. Yeah,
I mean, the trouble with that is always that county championship wickets can be different to test pitches. I mean, test pitches are normally prepared, it's very obvious in many ways, with 5 days in mind. County championship, 4 days max. And of course, it depends on what sort of time is available for preparation. Theoretically, for a test match, a groundsman has a good couple of weeks absolutely clear to work on that pitch and work on that ground. So, in most cases, it means that test pitches last that bit longer. But let's face it, the Oval only started to offer something for Jadeja in the last afternoon. And he bowled very well. He took advantage, very skillfully, and that changed the game, or changed the end of the game. So, the pitch should last. You'd expect it to last. I mean, I can't see it. I can't see it being deliberately made to spin, because that would favour. You'd imagine that would favour India. So I suspect, what little I've heard about it so far, I suspect there will be a bit of grass around it. It does carry through, so pace actually has something going for it at Old Trafford. There's normally a bit of pace and bounce there, and that bounce is the sort of thing that attracts the spinners as well. But whether it'll actually get to that stage where it really helps two spinners, is anyone's guessing game, certainly from this distance. I'm going up there tomorrow morning and we'll be there pretty much at the start of play. By which stage all these decisions will have been made or will be being made at that moment. And we'll have a look at the pitch then. But that, of course, doesn't help us 24 hours ahead. I mean, the Ashwin thing has been intriguing simply because we know he can bowl in virtually any conditions. But there again, India have got to where they are in this series by using the seam bowlers, by rotating the seam bowlers. I mean, Thakur coming in at the Oval and doing so well both with ball and bat was the answer to all those saying that Ashwin should play, because the man who came in actually did a very good job and helped them win the game. Without Thakur, it would be a very, very different game all round. So, loyalty to those that have done well is one thing. I mean, there's still scope, I think, to make at least one change in the middle order with Rahane, because poor Ajinkya has not been, Jinx has not been in great form. He's not been in the runs. He ground out his 50 at Lords, which, yes, that was part of a win at Lords and very much important in the context of that particular situation on that particular day. But overall, of course, he knows he's underachieved. So you might have the chance to strengthen the batting by bringing someone new in. And let's face it, this is an era, although we say things like, how can you bring someone in when they've had no cricket? Well, actually, it's an era where people do that. And, sometimes you take that gamble. And if someone gets, 30, 40, 50 or more, then the gamble has been repaid when you're replacing someone who's not looking like he's going to get 10 or 15.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, because when we take a look at Rahane, he's dipped, of course, in the series. And even before that, he just had the Melbourne 100 to show for. Would you bring a like-for-like replacement for Rahane, someone like Vihari, a newcomer like Suryakumar who hasn't played Test cricket? Or would you probably bring in Ashwin for Rahane? Even it seems strange, but is that a thought?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if Ashwin were to come in, I think it needs to be for a bowler. It needs to be for a seamer. I think that's more likely. I think, when you've got a 2-1 lead, yes, you want to try and win the game to make it 3-1. And of course, winning your game means you win a series emphatically, not just clinging onto it by drawing. But I think at the same time, look at the way India's batting has been at times fragile. If the openers don't have a good partnership, it exposes a middle order that hasn't been in its best form. Even Kohli, he's had good starts, but he's yet to convert something into something really memorable. So there is that feeling, I would say, that you want a specialist batsman in place of Rahane. If you're going to take the gamble that Rahane might suddenly come good because his pedigree, fine. But I would be very tempted to bring in someone. Vihari is probably the obvious choice, because then you've got a middle order player for a middle order player, and it saves having to upset the order at the top where things have gone well. So when it's working, don't try and fix it. Don't try and change it. So I suspect that could be one very good option for them. And rather than Yadav, and Vihari is someone who's at least played a Test match, I think that's useful when you're coming into this situation. I mean, yes, the talent of the young man, Suryakumar, I mean, that is something for the future. That is something which you can use in the future. It's great. People like that, you bring people like Yadav into a squad to experience the feeling of being part of an Indian team on a tour like this. And you'll learn from being around great players. You'll learn from being in that dressing room. And then when the chance comes in maybe a year or so's time, whenever it does come, then already you are part of that dressing room. So that's the value there. But I think at this stage, giving him a chance, although I'm sure he'd love to take it, I think is probably not the best option when you've got someone like Vihari ready to play.
Yeah, and he's been waiting a long time for that. So good luck to Hanuma Vihari if he's in the reckoning. A final couple of questions from me before we just wrap up this preview. And guys, I just want to tell you, all you guys watching right now, thank you so much for the love for the channel, for David Gower. He's been going through a lot of comments. And of course, we'll get in touch with you guys post the 5th test to ask David any question that you guys want, whether it's in the IPL. I'll leave it up to you all. In the grander scheme of things, one question for each team. For England, now if they do lose this series, they've lost the one to New Zealand before. Now India, it doesn't put them in good stead going into the Ashes, given the fact that even Ben Stokes and Jofra Archer might not be available.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's worry about the Ashes after this game is done. I mean, I've always said, if you remember right at the start of the series, I said, no need to talk about the Ashes because this is a landmark series. This is two top teams vying for supremacy. And this is a major series. India England is a major series. So the first thing is to try and get through this game and try and for both teams to try and win it for their own respective purposes. Then from England's point of view, yes. I mean, in the press this morning, there are still doubts about Australia as to what restrictions will apply to the team and the possibility of the wives travelling effectively. I mean, all these things which are part of the modern game with bubbles and COVID and all the rest of it, are important. These are very strange times still. So the Ashes, I think we're pretty sure it will go ahead because there's so much at stake for the Australian Cricket Board apart from anything else that I'm sure pressure will be brought to bear to try and make sure that it goes ahead, not at any cost, of course, but if at all possible. There will be issues about selection. I mean, as I say, even the great Jimmy Anderson is not renowned for conquering Australia. He's probably had one good tour and several average ones. Great moments, of course. Someone like Jimmy always has great moments, and they can be important. The composition of the attack, fitness. At least they'll have a little bit of time to get everyone fit again, but they're going to need a bit of pace. So someone like Mark Wood comes into play, but he, as we know, is rarely fit for 5 games in a row. He's rarely allowed to play 5 games in a row. And the batting, well, there are still going to be question marks about the batting, especially in Australian conditions. So there's lots to think about, and that will come. They'll start doing that pretty seriously, of course, as soon as this Test series against India is done. But at the moment, I would say that all things being equal, Australia will definitely start favourites down under. They like their home conditions. I know, of course, that India beat them not so long ago now, and that was an extraordinary event, an extraordinary feat. But Australia against England, the Ashes, the history, the whole thing comes together beautifully every time they meet. At the moment, Australia will start favourites, of course.
All right. I mean, let's see how England cross that bridge when it comes to that. But India, I know you said 2-2, and I know you're going to stick with your prediction here. But if they come away with a 3-1, or if they bat out for a draw, whatever it is, and have a series win out of their bag, where does this sit for them in terms of series wins? And how big a statement will it be from this Virat Kohli team?
It'll be big. It'll be very big. I think, there is, we talk about Ashes history, but of course there is England-India history as well, all sorts of it, on and off the field, a political history, a sporting rivalry. And it is important. I think one of the great developments about Indian cricket over the last 10, 15 years has been the continued and progressive understanding of how to do well and win overseas. I mean, for instance, contemplating India winning in Australia wasn't even viable until the last decade. Expecting India to win in England wasn't really viable until recently, relatively recently, as you said before. But for someone like Kohli, this team he's put together has to be the strongest unit that they've ever had because it covers all departments. The seam bowling is stronger than it's ever been. You've got some of the great players from Indian batting, Kohli at the top of that list, but you've got Rohit Sharma making hundreds overseas as well. He is a lovely player to watch. So it's a very strong team. And I think to validate the progress they've made both last winter in Australia and this summer here in England, to take the series would be exactly what they need to put a very, very big tick in a very, very big box.
Yeah, I mean, big words from you, and rightly so. At the end of the day, what these guys have done, I mean, let's not take it for granted being Indian cricket fans because we're getting spoiled with success, but it'll be something which is immaculate indeed. Finally, for me, because the news broke out last night, I should say, with Dhoni as a mentor for the T20 World Cup squad and Ashwin in. I don't know if you saw much of it, but what do you make of it? Even as a neutral, does it give you exciting feels, David?
Yes, you caught me slightly on the hop. I did see a headline about Ashwin being picked in this World T20 squad. I'm going to have to bluff my way through here. I mean, we know full well that India, especially with IPL in the background, when I say in the background, IPL is very much in the foreground of everyone's lives nowadays. But India, with all that experience, the players with all that experience from that one competition, and with the competition being played in a part of the world not far away from home, where Indian skills will no doubt come into play. And of course, if you're thinking about playing in the UAE, well, someone like Ashwin is a potentially very important player. So certainly, I'd say, although it sounds surprising, having been on the sidelines through this summer, it is a question, I think, of conditions and experience, and he can still be very, very handy indeed in the UAE. So it's a squad there which will be certainly amongst the favourites, top 2 or 3, if not tournament favourites at the start of it. because of the skills that you get from playing so regularly in IPL. And I think that makes it, a very exciting squad to have to pick.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be exciting times for every cricket fan. If you look at it for the next 2 months, it's just chock-a-block cricket, and we'll bring it all for you guys in cricket.com until we catch David on day 5, hopefully right after the proceedings of the series. We can get his thoughts and, of course, answer all your questions. So let us know in the comments below what you need to ask David. Until then, subscribe. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen. And it's a goodbye from me and David Gower. David, any final words, any wisdom that you can offer all the fans watching this brilliant final test?
Well, Avanish, there are only 2 things I need to do, and they're the same on both hands. It has to be 2-all. For my own sanity, it has to be 2-all.
And I'm going to slowly creep in 3-1 just to match you. But great banter, great chatting with you. And like I said, we'll catch you after this test match.
Okay, look forward to it. Right, all the best.
Cheers. Take care. Bye.
All right, see you soon. Yeah.
Cheers. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.